Hi everyone and welcome to your horoscope for the week of May 25th, 2020. We have a very active and powerful sky playing out all throughout the week, but this is where the energies are not going to be quite as intense, quite as dynamic as we got used to it, and especially in the last 2 weeks. It isn't really due to outer reality moving or flowing that much slower, but rather because there's a heavy concentration of energy in the sign of Gemini, an air sign. So our thoughts, our thought processes, our minds basically, and many times even our communications, our interhuman connections are going to be playing out with the speed of light. So we are going to be not just one but many steps ahead of reality, and kind of reality has to catch up with us. And this is why it's not going to feel that very dynamic, that very quick. But in truth, in reality, it is just as quick, just that we are that much quicker than physical reality. And chances are we will have to be extremely quick because next week is going to definitely be inviting us to adapt, to take on a very versatile, a very non rigid take on life and basically everything that has to do with life, each and every area of our lives, because the North Node is also in the sign of Gemini, and there's a high concentration of power in mutable signs. For example, there is Neptune and Mars in Pisces, which is a mutable sign, and there is, of course, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, and the North Node in the sign of Gemini, which is also a very powerful mutable sign, especially the mutability of the intellect of the air element. So even if we try our very, very hardest not to go about things in a very hasty, a very quick way, this might not be totally under our control, because this is just when the mind is boosted, the mind is almost electric, and as long as there's even a tiny fraction of new information that reaches our sphere from anywhere, it doesn't really matter if it's from the internet, from a friend, from where, even if it's like an inner epiphany, as soon as we get even a tiny spark of new information, we have the tendency to try and process it immediately. And under a sky with so many retrogrades, Saturn retrograde, Jupiter, Pluto, and Venus retrograde, everything is turning inwards, everything is happening internally. This is where we are actually called to at least attempt to make a decision, to clarify everything that isn't very clear to us in the present moment, regardless if it has to do with the future of our material situations, regardless if it has to do with matters of the heart, what we and who we love, or simply if it's just how we relate to physical reality, the world stage, and everything that is going on in this area of our lives. Because of all the retrogrades, it is like an instinctive impulse, like an irresistible reflex, basically, to get a grip on things, to embody stability and act from such a place of grounding. And of course, at the same time, the shadow side of these, the fears, the insecurities, that panic that we are not grounded, that we are not stable, that we don't have everything that we need in our lives, that can have a very powerful grip on us. So partially our desires to have this stability are going to be motivating us, but the other side of the spectrum is the fears and the imminent sense of necessity that we just need to have everything stable, everything grounded in our lives, because our minds need to get a grip on the future wherever we're progressing towards. Well, especially because, Gemini is the mind, the lower mind, the practical mind, the mind which finds applicability to our highest knowledge, to even our highest life philosophies. It needs a grip, it needs to basically know, anticipate, or at least hope that we're heading towards a safe and sound direction regarding our futures. And this is exactly the North Node in Gemini, which is also exalted in this part of the sky. And of course, in the present moment, it's an anaretic degree, and its symbolism is that much amplified. So basically, it doesn't matter if this comes through as fears, as insecurities, or as very powerful desires. This is basically setting the main theme of the next 18 months of our lives. So, whatever we may find inside of us that preoccupies us, especially mentally, that much more, well, that is going to be the path which we are going to take in the very close future, in the next 18 months of our lives. And we start the week under a very heavy energy, that of the Venus and Neptune square, this ongoing, very emotional, very confusing, very surreal energy, basically. The very same energy which last week and even before, it really challenged a lot of relationships. It really challenged a lot of people to dig deep inside themselves and try to figure out what they love, what they desire, their true sense of self-worth, honesty in all their relationships. But because this is a hard aspect, a square, the more we dug deep inside, the more we asked the very delicate and very powerful questions, the more confusion we just attracted into our lives. And there was a lot of miscommunication, there was a lot of misinterpretations, like a passive inner frustration, dissatisfaction. While for other people, this played out in a totally opposite way, where they have been just immersed in a bubble of fantasy, illusion. They didn't have a very healthy grip on physical reality, so it was their fantasies or their escapist tendencies, pessimism or excessive optimism, which actually dominated their lives. But this week, the power of the square is waning, it is fading away, and fortunately, this represents that we are finally getting in touch more and more with realism, with reality, where our illusions, may they be our very own fabrications, or may they enter our lives from society or from the media or wherever. This is where we are finally starting to reach clarity, but it isn't like an instant energy where one day we're confused that the next day everything is crystal clear to us. No, unfortunately, this is much slower and for some people even painful, but there's other celestial conversations taking place in the sky which can add a very powerful element of clarity and grounding to this energy, to counterbalance it basically. And one of these is Mercury conjunct Venus, Venus retrograde in the sign of Gemini, and afterwards Mercury is going to be meeting the North Node in Gemini, and this is going to be a really powerful mental energy, because Mercury conjunct Venus can basically play out in very many different ways for different people. So for some people, this is where they get a intellectual, rational boost, where their heart spaces and the matters of their heart, whatever they love, desire, etc., is not going to be the dominant force here. So the mind counterbalances this, and they find some kind of even an imperfect balance where they can just operate on a basic level. While for some people, this can represent the energy of a very healthy distraction, where they might find in their lives certain things, certain hobbies which they are very passionate about. For example, arts, crafts, hobbies, computer games, or any kind of new hobby where they can just focus on, and focusing on that will detach them from the big drama, from the big picture, from the big karmic theme of, this period, and this can be like a breath of fresh air, a respite from all this drama, all this heavy emotional energy. this very profound psychological purge. But either way, as soon as Mercury is going to be meeting the North Node, for example around the 28th of the month, well, that is the energy where we get a sense of purpose, where whatever we have to accomplish, especially over the next 18 months, is going to be crystal clear in our minds one way or another. We may not know all the small details, we may not even have the big plan, but the purpose itself is going to be crystal clear, and that is a very profound celestial help, because if our mind grips on it, if our mind can focus on it, well, that is already an energy of psychological and emotional and mental stability, because we know what we want to do, and that is already enough. But of course, just a couple of hours before that, Mercury is going to be in 29 degrees of the sign of Gemini, an anaretic degree, and that day can be a very confusing day, because chances are that there are going to be a lot of miscommunications, where we communicate much more than we intended, or maybe we're going to be bombarded by so very many different sources of communication that it's just going to shut us down, and we need to take a break from the internet, from work, or from wherever. But at the same time, it can be really revelatory, because it can highlight our vulnerabilities, especially the vulnerabilities of our mind. May that represent self-defeating thoughts, basic chitter-chatter of the lower mind, which doesn't help us focus. It can be overthinking, overanalyzing, fears, worries, insecurities coming into play, but still it highlights what our weakness is, and that already gives us the chance to counter it, to find greater balance, and basically to reprogram our lower minds for reprogramming the higher mind. Now that takes a lot of energy and effort, but the lower mind is not that hard to reprogram. All you need to do is ground yourself in something you believe in, something you're passionate about, something that is very important to you, and the purpose will empower that reprogramming effort that you have to invest, and it will make it successful. So the 28th can be a very powerful day for reaching greater clarity and stability, especially mentally. Now, even before we get into the week, at the very beginning of the week, we also have the Sun in Gemini receiving a very powerful conversation of supreme harmony from Saturn, from fellow air sign Aquarius, and this can be really, really good. This can be a blessing. Now, this can basically align us with our sense of purpose. This can ground our minds into physical reality, because Saturn has much to do with realism. It has to do with down to earth things. It has to do with all the rules and regulations which govern the world of matter and everything within it. Society, even finances, even, the collective, the local community, and everything like that. So that can help us have a sense of reality, and we can feel that, our collective that we belong to supports us, or our circle of friends or our interhuman connections can support us. For some people, this can be a major blessing, because Saturn can have so much to do with a karmic reward, a karmic harvest, reaping the fruits of your labor, especially if you have done charitable work, humanitarian type of work, or a good deed in the past, and that needs to be repaid. It is a very good energy for everything that has to do with intellectual creativity, with professionalism, your job, your career, especially if it's online. This can be an energy of big blessing. It can also represent honors, gratitude, appreciation reaching you, or your professional notoriety, basically creating miracles in your life, where people recommend you, business is going to come in. So this is a very, very good and prosperous energy for some people. But even if it just manifests as, help or promise of help from the government, from the council, from the local authority, regarding any problems that you might be facing, especially problems which has to do with, the present moment, as in the COVID and the economic collapse and all of that. That can also be an energy of blessing because you feel supported. You at least you have a backup plan. But of course, the main theme of Gemini, friendships, communication, interhuman connections, it is very likely to bring new friends, new allies, new people who share the same desires, ideologies, life views can enter our lives. So this is also a really good energy for the future, not just to complete whatever was left behind from the past, especially if it has to do with karmic completion, rewards, and a harvest basically. On the world stage, this energy can represent very powerful scientific advancements, coming up with the most ingenious plans that actually work, that actually offer a down to earth and practical solution to the problems of society, to problems of the people. And this can also represent clarity even in matters of the heart, because Venus is in this part of the sky after all, and she's retrograde, so that is where the problem lies. So this really powerful trine of the Sun and Saturn can represent help, can represent grounding, clarity, a touch of realism in everything. But this energy is going to be stronger at the beginning of the week, especially at the very, very beginning, and then it's going to lose its intensity. But fortunately, there is a totally different type of energy, a very positive aspect, a sextile between Mars in the sign of Pisces and Uranus in the sign of Taurus, which can be a really powerful game changer, because it is absolutely true that Mars is not comfortable in the sign of Pisces, and Uranus cannot bring forward its quickness and its haste in the sign of Taurus. But each and every time these two planets speak in a harmonious conversation, this can represent pleasant surprises, it can represent solutions, it can represent so very many unexpected events that can be a massive game changer in our lives. And especially because Mars is in the sign of Pisces, a part of the sky which rules the subconscious, it rules our emotional worlds, it rules the past, it rules everything that happened to us, including our past lives, and things which are not very clear to us, for example, repressed and buried emotions. Now Mars here is digging up all of these, and they can reach our awareness, but fortunately this sextile with Uranus can also offer us very quick solutions. It can be a celestial boost where we can, obtain psychological healing, that surrender, finding forgiveness, confronting our fears, our traumas, our repressed emotions. We can accomplish all of this that much quicker, maybe in a couple of days, whereas normally it would take like 3 or 4 months to process a very profound pain, for example, because psychological healing doesn't come easy. It is very, very, difficult. It requires a lot of patience, a lot of willpower. But talking about willpower, Mars in the sign of Pisces, yes, it is not very strong, but it is still willpower, it is still courage, it is still emotional fortitude, that yes, we are able to process it, we are able to close the doors to the past, we are big enough as souls to find forgiveness and everything like that. So this sextile between Uranus and Mars can be a very positive energy. It can be very lucky for some people, because there's a totally different element to this. For, Uranus is in the earth sign of Taurus, a fixed earth sign, so it is the fertility of the earth, it is the fertility of physical reality, where manifestations can sometimes enter very unexpectedly, especially when the two quickest energies in the zodiac converse with one another, Mars and Uranus. So whatever we fantasize about, whatever we dream about, whatever we focus on psychologically and emotionally, of course spiritually as well, like for example Mars in Pisces, the power of prayer, the power of meditation, setting intents, setting new goals, that can manifest in a very quick and unexpected way, because that Uranus is in the sign of Taurus, and if it has to, Uranus can even shake the earth. From a strict spiritual perspective, this configuration of Mars and Uranus can definitely represent dreams, being able to sense the future, deja vus, going back into your past lives, either through dreams or like a vision. It can also represent very powerful inner epiphanies. It can also represent like divine downloads. So it is definitely the energy of divine guidance, which can even connect you to, for example, people in your distant past, people and relationships which once didn't really serve your greatest good, because neither of you were prepared, and this energy can instantly revive the past, and where you have the option to build new bridges, because both you and those people from your past have changed considerably. But at the same time, Mars is the lower octave of Pluto, so it is capable of producing terminations as well. So this energy can also be very useful for terminating soul contracts, for example, karmic relationships, very, very strong interwoven interhuman connections which are no longer necessary or unhealthy. This power can give you the impulse to just terminate it and close all doors to the past. Another very interesting energy, which is basically a minor astrological aspect called the quincunx, being held by Mercury, Jupiter and Pluto at the very, very beginning of the week. And this is also the energy of surprises, delights, shocks, unexpected communication, unexpected information, which can be also a minor game changer. Quincunx connects two areas of lives which have absolutely nothing in common, and the end result is usually either like an awkward situation, a very humorous, a very funny situation, or for some people it can be shameful situations, shocks, unpleasant surprises, but which are not very impacting, but they are impacting psychologically, especially if Mercury is involved here. That means that we put focus on it, so it can be very significant, but for a very short time, a couple of hours or that day, for example. So this can play out either as fake news, miscommunication, which leads to either humor, funny situations, a laugh, or something really awkward. It can also represent fake promises, like especially Jupiter in the sign of Capricorn. It wants to deliver, but many times it can't because it's limited. Or it can also play out as the correspondence or mail or communication of someone reaching the wrong destination, and then this also connects you, for example, with the recipient, or if you're the recipient, it connects you with the owner, and this, for example, can create a very unusual friendship or an interhuman connection which is totally out of coincidence. But the reason I mentioned this, even though this isn't a very strong energy, is because this can make the very, very beginning of the week quite awkward, quite strange, weird, very unusual. So if you're sensing all of this, don't panic because it will fade quite soon. Now Mercury also forms a different kind of quincunx on the 29th, after it leaves the sign of Gemini and enters into the sign of Cancer, and from here it forms a quincunx with Saturn, and this quincunx focuses on our limitations, on our obstacles. It may be that we receive criticism online from other people, from other members of society, for example, and this can make us feel very silly, very uncomfortable. This can also play out as we perceiving our external limitations like huge unpassable brick walls which just stop us in our tracks. Especially since Mercury is in the very emotional sign of Cancer, this can also play out, for example, as we feeling that we're a burden, a nuisance, an inconvenience in the lives of others, especially our friends and family, or it can play out as we, wishing to protect our families, our loved ones from external reality, especially that Saturn in Aquarius, which can be perceived as, like the limitations, the rules, the regulations, the lockdown, the social distancing. But of course, this can also play out as conflict within the family, starting from a very insignificant, awkward, and random reason. But as I say, this is a quincunx, so this is a very minor energy. Just that if it plays out in your life, don't fear, don't panic, it's nothing long lasting. It is just basically an awkward moment, a moment of divine humor. But of course, the focus, the main energy is definitely Mercury changing signs. This is the energy shift. Mercury entering the sign of Cancer, a sign which has very much to do with our emotional world, because it is the home sign of the moon after all. It is the energy of nurturing, it is the energy of care, familiar connections, the love, the bond, the respect, and the instincts also, which bind together family members. It is also our local community, the culture and the ancestral heritage to where we belong to. It is our place in the world. It is all these elements. And Mercury entering here just adds a touch of intelligence, a touch of the mind, and flow of energy into this area of life. So this will increase communication, it will increase the flow of information, and it is also increasing everything that has to do with the sign of Cancer on our inner list of priorities. So our families, our emotional security, us being there for our loved ones are going to be emphasized for as long as Mercury stays in this part of the sky. But fortunately, even though Mercury here is not very quick, it is not the most efficient energy, but it still amplifies our emotional intelligence, our sense of empathy. This is where we are not going to rationalize compassion, solidarity, being there for another person, nurturing someone. This is where it becomes that much more natural and that much more important to us and our, even including the mental sphere. Because the mental sphere, which is infused with empathy, which is infused with compassion, well, it becomes that much more powerful, a very relevant problem solving tool, and it also offers our mental spheres of magnetism to find solutions to problems, especially when the main goal and the motive is our own desires to be compassionate and be there for other people, especially those who which we love deeply and profoundly. Now, towards the end of the week, we are going to have a hard aspect, a square, between the Sun in the sign of Gemini and Mars in the sign of Pisces, and this energy is definitely going to be rather uncomfortable, because as I said earlier, Mars in the sign of Pisces can all of a sudden pull on the surface, to the surface, all of our repressed emotions, our feelings, the past, our hurts and pains, everything that actually bother us psychologically, but we had no choice but to bury it in the watery world of Pisces. So the square between the Sun, the main luminary body, whatever we see, whatever we are aware of, especially in the sign of Gemini, which is the mind, communication, rationalizing everything, forms a square with Mars in Pisces. Well, that is going to be a very uncomfortable energy, because we are going to be aware of everything that we repressed, everything that is playing out in the background of our minds, in our subconscious, for example, everything that we need to still accomplish emotionally, For example, accepting, surrendering the past, accepting and surrendering negative events which hurt us and cause traumas. And because the sun is in the sign of Gemini, we also need to work with it quite rationally. So we need to find a very healthy balance for all this subconscious energy not to bother our minds, not to bother us being able to function in society, in our lives, in all our interhuman connections. And for this to happen, the sun in Gemini, certain things, deep emotions are going to be verbalized. The truth is going to come out. This has also much to do with secrets, especially secrets that we keep, that we guard, and that we hold. May it be very, shocking, very powerful secrets. Like, just an example, this is just a basic example. When someone was a victim of abuse in their childhood, well, that is a secret they're going to guard with every fiber of their beings because, for obvious reasons. And chances are, when the sun speaks with Mars in such a conversation, and Mars being in the sign of secrets, well, then maybe sometimes unexpectedly, without us being able to control it, the truth can just come out. We can just speak our hurts, our pains. We can, release the hurt, the past, the pain, everything that went on in our youngest years. And releasing it needs us to, get it out, to verbalize it, to speak it, to dish it out. Because that is the only way we can actually release it. If the awareness, if the mind of another person comes face to face with whatever happened to us, well, that is already a psychological comfort that we are not alone, so we can release it that much more efficiently. But of course, this might have nothing to do with traumas or very negative events. This can also be like shame, guilt, insecurity, something that we hide from others, a side of ourselves which we do not want other people to become aware of. It can also represent our masks that we put on to function in society, and those can drop suddenly, unexpectedly. But ultimately, even though this energy is very uncomfortable, this can represent a powerful psychological purge. So the sun, our egos, our sense of self-identity, is being healed. It is being basically reconfigured. It is being operated on symbolically, where we use the power of that Mars, our inner drive, our energy, our psychological fortitude and know-how, to basically remove the symbolic tumor that is plaguing our sense of identity, our egos, the light of our inner sun, whereas we are taking all the filth, all the secrets, everything that bothers us, everything that blocks us, stops us, everything that weighs down our heart and ultimately our minds, and we just rip it out and close the door to it. So yes, this is painful, this can lead to conflict, this can lead to misunderstandings, this can lead to harsh words, this can lead for some people to big shocks because they dish out everything. They dish out, for example, secrets and true feelings that they have been hiding for years. So this is not going to be easy or comfortable, but ultimately the potential of healing, the potential of purging and just returning to innocence is a huge factor that we need to consider, because we are doing this inner work for our long-term futures. So even if it's painful, even if there's like karmic manifestations to this, whereas something happens and it triggers us, that's karma, because Pisces is a very karmic sign. All of this is to our greatest benefit, our greatest good, because we need to be free of these and we need to heal, basically, not just on a soul level, but also the mind, also the lower mind. Gemini has to heal. Because the sun in Gemini, what does it tell us? It's not enough for us to know our true worth, to have a very healthy self-worth just internally. We also need to express it, communicate it, and be honest with other people. Be honest, especially regarding our self-image. This is who we feel that we are. This is who we know that we are, and there is absolutely no reason why we shouldn't express it. Let our inner light shine regardless of what other people think of it. This is our right. This is, we live in the modern era. This is why we actually incarnated in this timeline, so that we can be freer, at least in our identities, much more than in any other timeline. But unfortunately, if this wasn't enough, Venus retrograde in the sign of Gemini is going to be holding the same time of conversation with Mars, a square, a conversation of tension, and this complicates things even more, because chances are, whatever we may feel deep inside our hearts, may that be something very positive, something even totally surrealistic, idealistic, or something very negative, we may not be able to hide it as we could at any other time. This is where staying silent might not really be an option. Venus is not really the planet which has to do with communication, but Venus has very much to do with gestures, with, for example, communication of the heart, what we project onto others, and that may be more than enough to get our points of view across, may it be out of sheer intent or just coincidentally, where other people might pick up that we don't agree with something, or we are, carrying a heavy weight in our hearts. This is where communication is definitely going to happen, and this will be a moment of maximum honesty when we just speak everything that we feel, even if we are not very clear, even if we are not very certain, even if we don't even know what we feel. This is where we have to express our feelings, and the more confusing our feelings are, well, the more confusion it's going to bring to all our communications, to all of our relationships. And because Mars is communicating from the sign of Pisces, well, this can have so much to do with the past as well. This is where some relationships are definitely going to be terminated, and other relationships are going to be healed and perhaps experience a totally new beginning. For we cannot forget that that new moon took place in the sign of Gemini. So one of the ways that can play out is an old relationship turning into something totally new and fresh. But fortunately, none of these hard squares are going to be exact at the very end of next week. We have to wait another week for their true expression, to their true manifestation to be felt that much more intensely. But fortunately, this also gives us a lot of time, a lot of momentum to prepare ourselves, and to just know that there are going to be very confusing vibes, very confusing energies, and most importantly, communications overwhelming us. So we can be one step ahead of everything and just act from a place of maximum self-discipline and just trying our very best to hold everything together. Now, another energy which is not going to be exact, but this is a very long-term aspect, is going to be the sextile between Neptune and Pluto. And next week, we're at the end of next week. This is just the very, very beginning of this energy, and we're going to be experiencing this over the next couple of weeks. And later on, in June, Jupiter is going to be joining Neptune in the same time of harmonious conversation called a sextile, and that can be a very, very positive, inspirational, optimistic energy, which just, holds the frequency, holds the optimism, holds the spiritual vibration, the faith, the inner truth from the background. This can be like an energetic, ethereal support column for our souls, our minds, and our hearts to still believe in something, to be able to wish and desire and dream about the greater good, progress, and ultimately whatever we desire to experience on a high soul level in the future. So this is really good because no matter how dire, doomy, gloomy the situation is, we still have like a faith, an optimistic tendency, a little bit of hope in the background, and especially Neptune and Pluto together is the power of alchemy. It is the power of inner transformation, faith, and the soul over matter. So if we are desperate enough, for example, we can tap into the power of that inner Pluto and just conjure a small scale miracle in our lives to save the day. But as this aspect grows stronger and gains more influence over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be talking about it a little bit more and in greater detail. But of course, until we get there, we have to somehow survive and make it through next week, especially from an emotional and even spiritual perspective, because the energies that Mars in Pisces and the heart aspects it's going to form, well, that's not going to be a very easy and comfortable energy. Maybe it's not as direct, confusing as the square between Neptune and Venus, but it is going to be like contradictory. It's going to be fueling us with emotional type of illogical passion, if that actually makes sense to some people, where we just desire to live in freedom, in peace, in harmony, and serenity already, where we don't even care what we have to do, we don't even care how much we have to work for it, we just want that moment, that karmic moment to enter our lives already, because we may be feeling so very stressed out, so very lost, so very confused in our path, because we know that we are on the right path, we know the big picture, still nothing seems to happen in our lives, nothing very palpable that can actually give us this ability to keep on going with maximum passion, with maximum determination on our path. It seems like everything, every communication, every new element that enters our lives just makes us question it even more. This is where we're genuinely afraid not to make the wrong choices, because we know that in a very delicate, complicated moment, especially regarding collective reality, a bad choice, a bad decision, an idealistic way of looking at life can be a finishing blow, because this is the world we live in the present moment, and there's nothing that we can do about it. And to add to this, like even psychological purge has to have a limit, where we purge something major and we are so relieved and happy that we finally got rid of it, we finally took off the stone off our hearts, and then unexpectedly, well, there's another issue, and then another issue, and then another. And this, we get the fact that this is towards our highest good, but the effort it takes can just tire us and just make us feel like that we're like living zombies, that there's no end to this. Like we're drowning in those Neptunian waters, and we have been drowning in it ever since the very beginning of 2019, and we still don't see the shore, we still don't see the solution, and everything that we see, everything that we ground ourselves into is just intuitive, it is just wishful thinking, a hope basically, because collective reality is definitely showing us the karmic element to it, where it's deconstructing our reality with great vengeance, with great proficiency, but the reconstruction process Now that is non-existent, that is not happening simultaneously, and of course we fear that where is this leading us? What is the solution basically? We cannot see it. Next week is not going to be like a huge pivotal moment when we just see the big picture and it makes so much sense to us. It is still going to be like we are in our Pisces prison, isolated, but this time spiritually more than anything, where we don't know who we can trust, where we don't know who understands us, who looks at us with sympathy and who doesn't. So the ongoing theme of purges, of insecurities, of just trying to get a grip on reality still continues. So we need to somehow resist. We need to get a grip on ourselves. We need to shut down all of our fears. And if disconnecting from the internet, from society, from social media and everything is what it takes for us to stay sane basically, then that is what we have to do. For some people this can turn into melancholy, it can turn into depression, it can turn into severe self-victimization. But remember, there is always help out there. Saturn is in the sign of Aquarius, and it doesn't matter which aspect is going to form, it is still the energy of solidarity, of our interhuman connections, of, the humanitarianism and compassion existing in our collective consciousness. Now that is there, so we can reach out. There is always someone out there to listen to us, to help us. We just need to have the courage and the strength to reach out and do the right thing. If the situation is too difficult, too heavy, too hard for us to go through it alone, it's no problem at all. It is not weakness. It is nothing. It is totally normal. It is totally human. So please reach out. There's always someone out there who is willing to listen to you. Well, thank you so much for listening. Wish everyone a blessed and safe week. Try to hold out. Try not to let this very surprising, very confusing, very up and down energy destabilize you. Of course, chances are all of us will have to surrender quite a lot of things right now. And these are inner desires, dreams, hopes, goals, whatever. This present sky needs us to surrender. It needs us to trust the invisible, the metaphysical, if that makes sense. And this is one way to cope and just go around this energy. Well, thank you once again. Until next time, bye for now.